The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable of those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited you, both of you, may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, and then when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So is Jesus giving party advice? Not likely, right? So what's going on here in this gospel passage about a meal? Of course, it's supposed to foreshadow the wedding banquet of heaven. That's what you're already at. You're participating in the wedding banquet of heaven. It's the feast of the Lamb or the wedding banquet of the Lamb. The Holy Eucharist, the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. This is all present to us already. And so you could read this as a foreshadowing of what is to come. It's always, in one sense, what is to come. But we'll just stay close to the text today. It's Luke chapter 14. It's verse 1, then it skips to 7 through 14. And we have to get back to, again, interpreting the gospel in the context it was preached in. Again, when we look at the gospel, we always have a tendency to try to figure out what it means to us at first glance, according to our standards or our interpretation of our culture. So we tend to read things according to how we live, how we understand the value of a society that we live in, these values. So in their world, the Mediterranean world of Jesus, meals and one's behavior at those meals were a very powerful means of communication. All right, so meals affirmed and gave legitimacy to a person's role and status. So again, a meal is not just let's get together and have a party and share some fellowship or whatever. It's we're going to communicate our role and status. All right, we are going to display the honor that we have in the world, in the society. This is the whole point of the meal. It's not necessarily just to get together and have this, a conversation like we have parties today. Again, see, we have a tendency to let's get together and just have fun. That's our value. That's not their value when it comes to meals. So this is a powerful means of communication. Meals affirmed and gave legitimacy to a person's role and status. And it almost always were attended, these meals were almost always attended by those of the same social class or rank. So we look at social class and rank for a moment. You have a caste system in India, for instance. You have in our culture society for many years, many centuries, how old our country is, not that long. We've always had this social class. There's this class warfare that goes back to ancient philosophies, etc., not the late modern philosophy, really. And you have this, you've heard of this stuff, the middle class. We use it all the time, the middle class. No one really uses the upper class, and now they call them elite. Or like lower class, the needy, right? You have this class system. And so you have these roles and status, this social class or rank. Nowadays, people don't want to be called upper or lower class. They just have this, now they divide the middle class into 3 classes, subclasses, right? Upper middle class, middle class, and lower middle class. There's middle class. So no one wants to be called either up or lower, right? There's a different classification for all this. So you have this understanding of class or rank that is very present in their culture. Since Jesus was invited to a meal at the home of the leading Pharisee, it indicates that Pharisees accepted Jesus as their social equal. I know the text says that he went to dine. It doesn't say he was invited. Well, clearly he wouldn't be there if he wasn't invited, because when you start to understand meals at the time, no one would have been there without an invitation from the host. So he was invited. It means that, of course, they see Jesus as his equal in social class, so to speak. Luke tells us that the people were there observing him carefully. So now we have to look at the Greek, the word for observing. They're observing him carefully. This has a nuance of a hostile observing. So they were insidiously or scrupulously watching Jesus. And as the people are watching Jesus, he at the same time is noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. And the Greek word for noticing, that translates more accurately as something more mild, to hold upon with the intellect, or to pay attention and gain understanding. So we have this activity at meals. See, it's just not everybody getting together and like, oh, you sit there, you sit there, you sit everywhere, you know. And it's very specific. And they're communicating something else. All right, who's better than me? Who's lower than me? And this is it all mattered to them at the time. So in the culture of that time, at meals, and you can find this throughout the Gospel of Luke, meals of this sort, everyone watches whether or one washes, who eats what, when, and where, what is done or omitted at table, who is invited, where people sit, with whom one eats, and in what order persons of different rank come to the table. And you find this again. It's in chapter 11, 6, 14, 7, 17, 15. This is all specifics about these things, as you stated there. The culture time, meals of this sort, everyone watches. They watch whether one washes, who eats what, when, and where, what is done or omitted, who is invited, where people sit, with whom one eats, and in what order persons of different rank come to the table. That's all in here in the Gospel of Luke. It's scattered throughout there. You can find this. Those who scrupulously watch Jesus' every move, they hope to catch him in some shortcoming of some sort. So the Pharisees have laid a trap for him. So we know that this is not just, hi, Jesus, come on over and have a nice meal with us. It's, hi, come on over. We set in a trap for you to find out if we can get something to kill you with. All right, that's what this is about. Again, they set up a trap for him. What's he going to do at the meal? Okay, so that's how significant meals were in that time. Now, Jesus, of course, he responds to this hostile observation. He knows that he's being watched. He knows that there's a trap set. He knows all that. And so then he responds to this hostile observation with this parable, bringing attention to their competing for more honorable seats at the table. So he tells them a parable that is attractive. Again, he uses their language. He uses the value of their culture. Hey, here's how you guys can get raised up to greater honor. And he uses that to fool them, if you will, to draw them in, and tells them a real meaning about actually humility and about who actually honors, and that's going to be God, of course, who honors or humbles, depending on how we are responding now. So of course, he brings this attention to the competition for honorable seats at the table, and he tells them that parable, which we'll touch on here, of course, we'll get to it. But first of all, I just want to back up a little bit to the first reading in Sirach 3, 17 through 20, and Proverbs 25, 6 and 7. Along with cultural humility, this taught them to stay at least one step behind your rightful honor, rank, or status. All right, so then you know where your status or role is, and you know where you're supposed to sit, but you want to go one step lower intentionally. Okay, so this is the parable, right? So then your host will come, oh, no, you're supposed to be sitting up higher. Then everybody sees it and go, oh, he's an important person, right? And so that's how he prepares or tailors the parable. Sirach says to be humble because you will find favor with God. The parable that Jesus tells says to do so because it allowed a person to be honored by the host who will invite one to a higher and more noble position at the banquet. So, of course, it's a banquet. It's a meal. Meal represents banquet. Banquet is the banquet, heavenly banquet of heaven, or the banquet of heaven. God is the host of the heavenly banquet, right? So you start to put all this together, it's God who is the host of the banquet in the reality of all things. All right, so the guests then are very aware of these cultural rules, but the Pharisees cannot resist the temptation to prefer to seek their rightful positions of honor. It's my place. I have a right to it. I'm going to take it. They can't resist that. So in Jesus' conclusion of his parable, though, he uses the passive voice in the phrases, will be humbled and will be exalted. That's an indication that God himself does these actions of humbling and exalting. It's not a credit or a shame that's given by someone else. It's will be or will be. That's a reference to God when it's written like that. God does these actions of humbling and exalting, and therefore it is God who determines authentic, honorable status. So where does your honor come from? Where do you get it from? It comes from God. God is the one who honors us or humbles us, in a sense, in a real sense. Furthermore, then, in the ancient Mediterranean world, accepting an invitation to dinner meant that a guest was obligated to return the favor. It was not uncommon for guests to decline invitations, especially if they realized returning the favor was more than they could handle or cared to handle. And so again, it is this reciprocity of you scratch my back and I scratch yours. That was actually a key factor in the economic life of those of equal social class in Jesus' day. It's also this principle of reciprocity also determined every guest on the host's guest list. So it was, I do you a favor and you do me a favor endlessly. That's what made things operate at the time. All right, so then you have this reciprocity. Jesus then gives advice to his host. Tells a parable, then he gives advice to his host. And it's rude and insulting and shocking, of course. It is extremely bad manners for a guest to tell a host how to be a host. That's not really a shocking part, though, that the guest is telling the host how to be a host. What's more shocking is that inviting anyone who cannot return the favor, like the poor, the lame, the blind, the crippled, anyone who cannot return the favor, that's cultural suicide. Right? And they all know that associating with such guests as the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, that would be dishonoring one's own status. Okay, that is what is so shocking to them about this parable. Is invite who, Jesus? Why would I do that to myself? Why would I embarrass myself and humiliate myself for the blind, the lame, the poor, and the crippled? That's what's shocking, and this is what Jesus is telling them. And so one's social equals would shun future invitations, turning a host of means into social ruination. But as Jesus is teaching, it's not human judgment nor the return invitation that determines honor, but rather God himself. That's what is so important in this parable, is that it's God who does the honoring. Again, the culture is not going to honor you because you happen to have these special guests at your party. The culture is not going to, likewise, shame you. The culture might actually shame you if you have these people, these poor blind, lame, and crippled at your party. It's like, that's shameful. He's hanging out with those sinners, those people who can't have any means to repay the favor. So the way they understood things is very different than the way we see and understand things as than it is today. So God determines true honor, and at the resurrection of the righteous. And so this is the problem, or the challenge with all this is like, yeah, I'm gonna suffer, I'm gonna get ripped off, so to speak, or I'm gonna get gypped, however you might want to look at that. I'm gonna have to suffer, I'm gonna have to give my things away, or I'm gonna help people who are less fortunate than me, so to speak, but I'm gonna be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Yeah, when you die and you rise from the dead. It's like, I have to wait till I die to get rewarded? Yeah. That's the whole point. I mean, that's the long game, right? That's why we're all in this. We're not, because this is not heaven, thank God. All right, we're only in a shadow of heaven. Earth is only a shadow, a participation in God's creation. It's God's creation, and it has all kinds of good things, but this is not heaven. All right, and the honor comes from God. The raising up comes from God. It's not about the culture. See, so all this stuff the last couple of weeks, it starts to form or go towards all one theme. How we're behaving on earth to get to heaven. So God determines true honor, and at the resurrection of the righteous, God personally will reward and honor the host who has been gracious to those unable to return an invitation. See, there is something in there for us when we go out of our way and we spend or we sacrifice and we give, because then we get something back. Not in terms of the earthly reward, but in terms of a heavenly reward. And if I'm focused on the heavenly reward, I gain and build that treasure in heaven that awaits me. And so they laid a trap for Jesus here in this parable, but Jesus' parable has trapped them. He's embarrassed them. He's humiliated them. Go invite the blind, the poor, the lame, the crippled. He goes, especially those who can't repay you. And he says, of course, those who will be exalted, who are exalted will be humbled. Those who are humbled will be exalted. And in other words, he's telling God is going to do this to you. Okay, if you want to be the one who self-aggrandizes or makes yourself really important and allows the pride to live your life for that, then it's going to be ugly for you at your resurrection. It'll be humbling for you. And so there's that warning in there, because what is actually happening here? Jesus comes to this home of the Pharisees. He knows what kind of company is there. What's he thinking? He's thinking, how am I going to get these people to turn to God? How am I going to get these people to repent? How am I going to get these people? I have another chance at helping these Pharisees and all this nasty company, so to speak. And I have this other chance to get them to turn to God. That's what he's thinking. Because those are God's children too. What do we do with them? We need conversion. We need prayer for conversion. And that's what ultimately he's there. So he tells this story. He tells this parable along with discipline. So going back to discipline last week, that's not a cultural, that's not a popular virtue, right? Along with discipline, humility is this other unpopular virtue of our culture. And you look at our culture, see again, they valued honor. What's our value? Think about our cultural values. What are cultural values in America? Vanity. People like to look good, right? They value that. Physical fitness. And these things are like also little idols too. They're like little gods. Sports, huge value in our culture, right? Everybody thinks all their children are going to be professional sports players. You know, that's how they act anyway. All right, so it's a huge value. Material things, lots of material things. What are the values in the culture? See, those are things that kind of drive the pride. And this is what humility is, the opposite of pride. That's why humility becomes so important. So another unpopular virtue of our culture is this is humility. It's a framework for all the virtue, and it's necessary for salvation. You know, which is why Jesus chooses to stress its importance, especially before this crowd in particular that he is with. They need to understand what humility is because they are so prideful in their understanding of salvation. They think because they have material possessions, they're blessed by God, and therefore they're going to go to heaven, like it's guaranteed to them. And Jesus is saying, you guys are really in big trouble. Your souls are really at risk, and you really need to turn back to the Lord in humility to start to understand what true life truly consists of. Eternal salvation is enabled by the virtue of humility, and humility is a result of self-knowledge gained through prayer. The problem is that, and I got a description a little towards the end of my bulletin article in the bulletin this weekend. There's a good definition of humility I put in there because people kind of struggle with this. What is that? Of course, it comes from the word, humus, which means ground, to be grounded, right? So you can't understand how you look to God until you're praying so that you can look at Jesus and you see yourself in him as if he were a mirror. You have to have that revelation about yourself. How do I actually perceive myself? How do I think I perceive myself? How do I think other people are perceiving me? If there's a difference between how people are perceiving me and how I perceive myself, then it's worth reflection. Maybe there's something I'm missing, right? We have a tendency to see ourselves differently, much better, more often, than the way reality truly is. And so eternal salvation is enabled by the virtue of humility, and humility is a result of self-knowledge gained through prayer. If we're not praying, we're not getting the self-knowledge. Okay, we never reflect upon our lives. If we never go to prayer, we never actually talk to Jesus, and we actually talk to Jesus about things that bother bother us, things that bother us with the thoughts, the feelings, the desires. If we're never talking to Jesus about these things, we never get to take an inventory, if you will, of what is going on within us. And then we just have this imagined view of reality. Is it a real reality? Is it just my view of it? And this is what a lot of people, they live in different imaginary realities. That's that way in which they view reality. So eternal salvation, though, is enabled by this virtue of humility. Jesus, he uses the attitudes of people at a banquet to remind us again that it is God who assigns the places at the heavenly banquet. That's the reminder in this. All these things all this status, that we get involved in. God himself assigns the places at the heavenly banquet, and that it is God alone who humbles the exalted and exalts the humbled. So a Christian acts in the world just like any other, but our dealings should not be based upon the pursuit of earthly reward or vainglory. The first thing we are to seek is God's glory, desiring heaven itself as our only reward. All we want is heaven. That's where we should be. If I sit back and I go, what do I want? And you start listing all these things. I want a new car. I want a new house. I want a better vacation. I want more time off from work. I don't want to work at all. I want to retire. It's like, where's I want heaven in this list, right? Where's I want Jesus Christ himself. I want to fully possess God. I want to be fully possessed by God. Where's that in my list of things I want? It should be number one. And so that's where we should be, because if we lose our focus, we're going to fall into the pride, then we're going to fall into being drawn down into the things of the earth, all God's creation. We can be too enamored with God's creation, it can become something bad for us. All right, there's a proper golden mean in all of this. So we ourselves need to not grasp at honors, seek notoriety nor recognition, for if we live humbly, then God will give them to us, especially in the resurrection. And yes, this is the long game. We're not in this for a short gain. It's short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. That's the game we've always been playing. I'm looking for eternal life. And in the meantime, while I'm here on earth, that requires sacrifice and suffering and sometimes persecution. But in the end, I'm living for God. I sleep well at night, which apparently is people have a lot of trouble sleeping at night. Okay, so I sleep well at night, and then, when I die, I rise to new life. This is nothing new, by the way. We just need reminded. But if we trust in God's personal and providential care for us, then we allow him to honor and exalt us. In his time, he will raise us up in his own way. If we are looking to raise ourselves up, then we're probably going to end up humbled. God takes care of us if we let him, and he can care for us even better than we ourselves. It's better to leave it to God than to trust in our own devices. So we need only to practice our religion and place our faith in the Lord. There's a, saying or whatever, but there's something that's kind of like a telltale about our character in the way that we treat people who are like waiters or waitresses or servers or cashiers, people who are like serving us. And how we treat them is kind of a telltale of how, what our character is actually like. Just because these people are serving me doesn't mean they're lower than me, right? Do I have that attitude? But if I take, those people who are the poor, the lame, the crippled, the servants, those who serve, in that sense, and I treat them as if they were kings or queens, or God himself, Jesus Christ himself, then that tells us a lot more about our character as well.